This is Pick Up the Mic podcast on WWMVLP 95.5 and Radio 22. This is Pick Up the Mic podcast. I'll be your host, Corey Whitmore. This podcast aims to bring new voices into the conversation about how to eliminate racial disparities in education in the Madison Metropolitan School District. Over the past couple of months, we've had numerous interviews with African-American high school juniors and seniors, principals, teachers, mental health therapists, to give us more perspective on how we start this conversation and how we find potential solutions. In episode 3, we're going to focus on the Black experience, the learning experience for our Black students, and also the issue of code switching, what it is and why they feel, many of them feel that they need to participate in code switching in the schools in which they attend. To start things off in this episode, I did want to read you a paragraph from an article I found interesting in the online publication Education Week. It is titled 5 Ways to Show You Care for Your Black Students. And the person that wrote this was Jaleel R. Howard, and this came out in July of 2020. Jaleel R. Howard is a former classroom teacher and a current doctoral student in the Graduate School of Education and Information Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles. In this article, he goes on to say, as a former classroom teacher and student, I can attest to the need for extra attention and care to help Black students feel comfortable in historically excluded spaces. Schools explicitly exclude them by way of suspension and implicitly exclude them through curriculum, culture, and policy. Black students are not the only ones who suffer racial discrimination in school. But in light of the recent protests for Black liberation across the country, it is imperative that Black students receive particular emphasis and focus. School practices must account for their experiences and needs. When we find ways to demonstrate care for Black students, our empathetic actions benefit all students. So I think with many of the interviews you will hear today, you'll hear a need for many of these things that Mr. Howard outlined in this article. And I would encourage anybody listening to go and look this article up in Education Week. So to start this conversation with the students, I found a online publication called Post Crescent, and I found an article titled Wisconsin's Racial Achievement Gap Widens. And this article was written by Abigail Becker from the Wisconsin Center for Investigative Journalism. In this article, they had interviewed an MMSD high school sophomore. This was in 2015, about his experience as a Black student in that school. So what I did for the students is that I read back mainly the quotes that he had given this publication, and then I asked them what their thoughts were on those quotes and if they had shared a similar experience to what this gentleman is describing. I will not put out the name of the 2 students that are a part of this article. I would encourage you, like I said, to, if you are looking for a little bit more information, hit the Post Crescent. It's an online publication, and the title is Wisconsin's Racial Achievement Gap Widens. Now, here's what the students from the article had to say. When a Memorial High School sophomore, I'll say student X, solves math problems in his head, other students give him surprised looks. He believes it is because he is Black. Quote, I just pay attention in class and do my homework, he says. Now, he is age 15 and he has a friend, I'll call him student Y, who's 16 and is a junior, and echoed his feelings. That student went on to say, people don't expect you to know anything, he explained. Now, they are high academic performers. They played soccer. They were active in the BSU at this school. And then the gentleman went on to say, it is almost as if you know something. They think you're weird or you're acting white. Some people think you're not Black just because you try to help yourself out and do well in school. Now, this is how we started our talk about learning environment. What are the other factors that are going on around you that may be contributing to this opportunity / achievement gap that we have? So here are what the students had to say.
Yeah, I agree with that because like in schools, like either like white counterparts or sometimes even black counterparts would like call you whitewashed if you were like smart or if you like knew things that like they didn't know or something like that. And it just seemed like, oh, it's not normal for black people to be smart or like even achieve higher than them or just like be better than them at certain things.
Yeah, I think like what they said was like really real because like I know like I've experienced that. And I think it's just like sad because like I feel like sometimes as like a high achieving Black student, you start to question your own ability because everyone makes you feel like you should be in this box. You're really like your own person. And I definitely have experienced that. Like of course, like everything's virtual and like I don't really get this as much now that we're in high school, but I remember in middle school, I would always get called an Oreo and people would be like, oh my God, you're so white. And it's just like I'm just being myself. And the funny thing was, it was always Black students calling me that. And it was making me like question my Blackness and like, should I be making good grades? Should I be acting like this? And yeah, I definitely have experienced that because it just makes me think of like times like I've been in like a group assignment and like I'd say the answer like, oh, I think it's 42. And they'd be like, oh, we should just check to make sure. And it's like, if that was like that white boy there said that. Like, and it's not even like we're being paranoid. Like that's just the reality. Like it's because
I think his friend is right. I think his friend is really right because I've definitely been in that situation where people didn't think I was gonna know something and I did. Especially like in school and class and stuff. What was the second question or the first one? Sorry.
So just your response to it, and then have you experienced something similar to this?
No, I have, but I've also had like friends around me experience it a lot, and it's just like it's almost insulting. Like just because I'm this color, it doesn't mean I'm less than you or less than you do. That's basically how I feel about it, honestly.
What really stood out to me in that was the was the line where you said that you're acting white. I think every Black person has heard that phrase before. You're acting white. So like it's as if being white means you're smart and you have good grades, and it's like that you're well educated, and it's just like that being Black, you're expected to be like stupid or
Yes, actually, like when you're reading that quote, I just feel like it was me. Like I feel like starting from freshman year, I took like most of my classes were all honors. Like I took math honors, English honors, and all. And I just felt uncomfortable. I started to feel uncomfortable like throughout like sophomore year because I was the only Black person in the class. And I remember this incident. It was sophomore year before like we went all virtual, and it was an English class, English honor, and they were talking. We were reading a book. We were reading The Color Purple, and and they just said something, and then they said something about like slavery, and everyone shifted and looked at me. I was like, what do you want? Like, what do you want me to do? Like, and I just was like, wait a minute, like, do I like have something like you want or something? I just felt so uncomfortable. And I just started thinking maybe I shouldn't even take these honors classes just because I don't want to feel uncomfortable anymore. So
my thought about the quote is very relatable because it's more so like yeah, you do good in school, you pay attention, and there are people that are like it's the stares, it's more like you was trying to be the teacher pet, like it's the jokes that come after it, and more so like, no, I just don't want to put more work on myself, like we can't skip it. And it's kind of like it's kind of like it's weird. Like sometimes it feels like there's judgment coming from teachers too, because it's like the compliments sometimes are like over the top, and you like, okay, I know it wasn't like that good. Like you answer like a simple math question and oh, good job. You know, that's what you're expecting from your teacher, and you're extraordinary. Like, how did you get that problem so well? And it's like, well, you just taught it like 5 minutes ago. It wasn't. It was more so looked at like, oh, you didn't expect me to get it or something, like it's a surprise or something. Yeah, I've experienced this a lot. As well as I said, English is my strong suit, so I love writing all type of stuff. So we get a question in class, and then the teacher might call you up to the board to write your answer down. And I go up and I put in all details, examples, citations, all type of things to get my point across. And then the teacher kind of looks at you like, oh, like you overdid it, or the class, like there's jokes coming from people, or there's, oh, I'll pay you doing homework. And it's kind of like you kind of feel like you're being taken advantage by some people. Some people don't take it serious. I've been asked, are you cheating, or did you write it down somewhere before you went and did it? Like it's hard for people just to accept the fact that you are smart, that you just can't put a grasp on things.
So as you can hear in some of these interviews, that in the response to this quote, many people felt like what the gentleman was saying in the quote was a reflection of many things that they've experienced and gone through. On one end, you have your peers kind of pulling at you because, as a Black student that's achieving, and maybe in some of these AP classes, they feel that, oh, you're capitulating to one side or whatever, or you're acting in a certain way when you're doing what you're in school to do, which is to achieve and learn and do the best that you can. On the other side, you have teachers who, for whatever reason, are surprised or a little bit taken back when you have these students that are able to articulate themselves, that are able to explain and do the exercises that you ask for them to do, and do it at a high level. I think some of those teachers need to take into consideration some of their nonverbal behavior and the message that's kind of sending Black students in these classrooms when they go up there and they fully explain a problem and give you everything that you wanted plus more, and you're either staring at them or you're making it out to be this huge deal, like you have far overachieved what I thought you would be able to do. That can be discouraging to many students that experience that. So I think teachers need to be cognizant of it, and maybe administrators in some of these schools may need to make teachers aware that these kids are picking up some of the nonverbal. You may not say it, but your actions and your response, they are reading into all those things, and that in some cases having a negative effect on the students and how they feel about you and how they feel about the classroom experience. So we're going to get into more on learning environment and code switching in this episode 3 of Pick Up the Mic podcast. We are going to be right back right after this. You are listening to Pick Up the Mic podcast with your host, Corey Whitmore. This is episode 3, the Black experience, learning environment, and code switching are the things that we are going to dip into in this episode. In the first part of the podcast today, you've heard the students' responses to a particular quote that we found online from 2015 from a Black Madison High School student, and he articulated his experience in the school system. And we're going to kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive into that. So what I basically asked the students is, I felt that one of the contributors to this achievement gap and opportunity gap could possibly have to do with the environment in which you are learning and you are growing or not growing. So for me, I wanted not only for myself, but for the listeners to really hear some of your experiences, some of the things that have happened, and how you felt about some of those things that have occurred in the district, whether they are positive or negative, just so that we can get a better feel of the day-to-day that these students are going through. I had a conversation with them talking about, you know how the old heads always say, oh, back in my day. But we did a little bit talk about some of the things that I went through, in comparison to what they're going through. It's a different era. And especially with cell phones and all this stimuli that seemingly is coming at them 24/7. The experience, though similar, we found a lot of similarities, but it is different. And I think if we're going to tackle today's problems, we can't use yesterday's solutions. We got to use today's solutions. And for us to figure out what today's solutions are going to be, we need to know what is the current experience of these students. It's one thing to, like I said, it's one thing to go back about your experience, and even though it's similar, this is what happened to me, and da-da-da. But it's different. It's 2021 now. And some of these things that these students are having to endure, aren't exactly the same things I had to endure. So let's hear from the students as they speak and talk about their own personal learning environments and what they've had to deal with.
Our classes aren't a welcoming environment. Like I talked about the last time with my biology class, that was not an environment that I wanted to be in. Like I would skip that class just because not because I couldn't do the work or anything like that. It was just because I felt uncomfortable in that classroom. I felt like I was always getting, like I felt exactly like I was the only Black kid in the class other than one other person, and that person barely ever used to even come to school. So it was like I was really just the only Black person in the class, and it just wasn't an open environment. And sometimes it's because of the students, and sometimes it's because of teachers, and sometimes it's both. But like I said, most of these public schools are not an open, welcoming environment for Black kids. It's not. Minority kids, period. It's not somewhere we go and we're like, we feel warm and welcomed and all this other stuff. Like a lot of times people are uncomfortable. There was a lot of classes that I took and that I decided to take and ended up dropping out of a couple weeks after being into it because of the environment. Like there's a lot of classes that I was very interested in and could have done good and got the information that I needed, but it wasn't a good learning environment for me. If it was either, like I said before, the teachers or the students or a mixture of both.
Like what I could really think about was like in our BSU we talked about like having more teachers of color in schools and stuff like that. And it just seems like when you're like in like higher advanced classes and stuff, there's like a lot of like your teachers white, your students are white, and like it just seems like you feel like lonely in that environment because you're like the only person of color, or like you're the only Black kid, and you just seem like left out. And sometimes it's just like kind of even harder to get support from them because you're like you don't fit. You feel like you don't fit in. And
there is something that is so awkward about having a white teacher teach you the meaning of the N-word. And then everybody like kind of like looking at you and being like, well, do you say it? Like I'm mixed, so I'm half Black. And so I was asked, well, if you're only half Black, does that mean you can say it? Or like, what if you're only a quarter Black? Does that mean, I was like, I don't have the answers. Or like in that part in The Color Purple, where it talks about slavery, there's this kid who's like the devil advocate kid. And he's like, I think we blame the Europeans too much for slavery because Africans sold other Africans into slavery. And that was like a conversation of like where people were like about to get physical with this man and like almost like fight him. Like people walked out of the room, there was like tears. It was like a whole big thing. And our teacher, he like never experienced this before. And he's like, I'm just a white man. I don't know anything about this. Like, I don't know what to do. And so he asked a bunch of us to come to class early, and he's like, what should I do? Which I appreciate that he was very concerned about our feelings, seeing that we were upset and wanted to make sure that we were good and what he could do to better the situation that was already so awful.
Like being like an African American student that's like excelled in some of the courses and stuff, like most of the teachers, like they like pick on you and like tokenism, they like try to use you as a like an image that like they always calling you for things that they could call on like other people, other like black students and everything, because like you're doing good in classes, and that's not always a good feeling.
Some students come from like homes that aren't, like families that are dysfunctional, maybe, I don't know. So maybe I feel like teachers basically kind of judge the students based off looks and how they act, and it kind of determines on if they should push them or not, if it's worth putting in the effort to push them. And I feel like the students kind of see that, so they're like, oh, the teacher not on me, so I'm gonna just do this, I'm gonna do it how I want to do it. And some teachers do really try, but like I feel like they often give up because they feel like they don't have the ability or the resources to save, quote unquote, those students or push them to do better.
As females, as black females, that we can't come off a certain way to people, because in the end it will turn around and mess us up. So yeah, it's not too many places or too many people, especially at school, that you can be yourself around.
I also think something that I've experienced that I understand why it was done, but it was a little much, is I think white teachers need to be more compassionate to Black trauma in terms of, in one of my history classes, they showed Emmett Till in a casket, because they're like, I want you guys to see how serious this was, because, like kids, sit there and they make jokes in class. Like, I want you guys to see how serious this was. And I understand why you're showing those kids, those white kids who, probably making racially insensitive jokes. But for like the two Black people that are in the room, it's just like, like how we talked about, like with George Floyd, of like kind of being numb to it. But it's like when you see that up there on the screen, it's like, this is the one place where I thought I could get away from this.
Right.
And so I think in the heat of the moment, they don't think about these things, because you can tell that they're trying to do what they think is right. They're trying to be socially aware, politically aware of what people prefer. But at the same time, they'll put in the time and the research. And if they don't want to, or if they can't, then they shouldn't be teaching those books or teaching that history class where that's the subject that has to be in the curriculum, just bottom line.
I think it's always going to be uncomfortable for a Black student to be taught Black history by a white teacher. And the goal of the white teacher, in my opinion, needs to be to make the Black students as comfortable as possible, and while also making the white students as uncomfortable as possible. Because when you're uncomfortable about something, it's like you realize that something needs to change, and I think teachers need to be like really careful about what they say and like their actions during these like mini Black history units, because it's a sensitive subject, and you could hurt, so like you could like seriously hurt somebody's feelings, like for example, like what Sierra said about the Emmett Till picture. Like Emmett Till was like, he was our age. So seeing something like that, like it just makes you think like that could have been me.
Right.
And do you really want a student in a class like feeling that way? So yeah, I think teachers just need to be like very mindful, like.
And a lot of times that's like that's how I feel about white teachers that have tried to help, or like I get a white savior vibe, like I get you're trying to be my savior, and I don't want that. I don't want a handout. I just want the same support that my white student mate, or whatever you want to call it, that the white students in my class are getting.
Seems like a simple request. We're going to dive in deeper right after this. Welcome back to Pick Up the Mic podcast with your host, Corey Whitmore. This is episode 3, the Black Experience, Learning Environment, and Code Switching. So we briefly got into some of the experiences that some of the students interviewed have been through, and they really were talking about what's kind of going on in their learning environment. They're talking about interactions between their teachers, between other students, and kind of how that has made them feel within their school. And I think that is very important in trying to figure out how we continue to close this opportunity/achievement gap. Some people will dispute that learning environment is a truly important component into closing this opportunity and achievement gap. One place I would point them to, there's an online publication called K-12 Learning Liftoff. And they referenced a new study from the Research Alliance for New York City Schools. That study shows that learning environments, and I'm quoting this from the article, how a school's learning environment affects student achievement. Learning environments play a significant role in student success. Most educators have suspected this for decades, and now they have evidence showing that schools can potentially lift student achievement by improving their learning environments. Going on in the article, they said that there's several key factors, that help support student success. Here are a few of them: safety and order, teacher relationship and collaboration, which a number of the students touched on, academic expectations, which we touched on in the first part of this podcast, leadership, and professional development. The article goes on to say that students who attend quote unquote safe schools, where they are expected to form positive relationships with their teachers and peers, have a notable advantage over students who attend schools without these beneficial traits. Hopefully, this new research will encourage more educators and policymakers to reconsider the importance of school environments. Unfortunately, there are not easy solutions to solving pre-existing problems. Simply knowing what factors matter most, however, should make it easier for schools to adapt positive changes. We hope that the school district is looking into this as a factor to school success, and also a factor that is a part of this opportunity and achievement gap, this environment. As we got into the discussions with the students, the issue of code switching came up. It wasn't in one of the initial questions I had asked the students, but about midway through the interviews, a young lady had talked about, when we were talking about school environment, the issue of code switching. So I kind of, before, I say anything else, I would like you to hear from the students about code switching. And my question to them was, have you participated in code switching? And do you feel that code switching can be exhausting? I mean, in essence, you are creating an identity for yourself that you may switch from classroom to classroom. If you're in 5 or 6 different classes a day, but in some of those classes, you may need to change who you are to try to achieve a grade, or to try to not be stereotyped in a certain way. I think a valid question would be, what is the toll of someone that is continuously doing that? And can that, in essence, kind of be exhausting?
Yeah, I would say because how I talk with my friends, or just other Black staff members, is not the way I talk to white teachers. And I feel like it's me subconsciously wanting to make white teachers more comfortable. And it shouldn't be that way, but it's I feel like a lot of these white teachers, they're scared of Black kids. And it's almost like I have to show you that I'm not one of those Black kids that you should be afraid of.
I mean, honestly, you either stick to one side that's the most popular, whatever code you switch into, or you just follow just a routine of knowing what area you can act yourself in and what area you need to be serious or put on a persona, so your teachers won't judge you or think you're a stereotype. So yeah, I have done that a lot. If I will articulate myself a lot more and choose my words a lot more carefully around my white teachers, so they don't think I'm just like some uneducated kid.
Yes, from a very young age, I had to learn to code switch and when and where to do it.
I mean, I guess you could say I code switch. I would say that's just been something that I've been taught. My mom is an African American woman, but she is adopted by white people. My grandma and grandpa growing up were white, so I was around white people a lot. So I got a secondhand look at how they operate and how different they take things that I say versus when my dad's side of the family comes over when they're all black, and how like I just have seen how people like that type of situations interact with each other enough to know for my best interest instead of having to try to deal with ignorance or negativity. I just code switch so I don't have to deal with something else. I code switch. So when I'm in school or when I'm hanging out with my friends, I talk how I want to talk. But when I'm raising my hand to talk and answer a question, I might have a little bit more, use certain words that I wouldn't use every single day.
Right.
But it's just to show that I have those different sides.
I definitely felt more myself when I had my first black teacher this year. Like I just said, it just feels more comfortable in general. I just can't explain it. And then with certain teachers back at West, I would kind of be like, I'm this perfect model student that you want me to be. I'm just gonna sit here. I'm the perfect student that you think I am. Even though it's not far from who I am. It's just they already label you when you walk into a room kind of thing. And like once you do one thing, it's hard for them to forget that one thing that you might have done or said or how you acted. And so I feel like I did that with a lot of teachers. There were certain teachers who were white that I just kind of felt comfortable with, that I was like, all right, I can be myself. Like, I know you're not going to label me in that way, because some of them knew me personally and kind of like knew my family and stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
So that makes a difference, especially like, I don't know, it just makes a difference. And then, is it exhausting? Yeah, it is. It's really exhausting. I feel like I code switched more in probably middle school than I did in high school, because when I got to high school, I was kind of tired of it. I was like, eh.
Yeah, it is tiring, but it gets to the point where it's like an automatic, like not even like, it's an automatic like switch in my brain. Like, oh, I'm around white people, now I gotta talk white, you know? But like the talking, it's not even like talking white. It's just like how I'm talking right now is how I normally talk, but I have to be careful of what I say and what kind of slang I use when I'm around like white people. So, like, it is tiring to always have to like, you know, change yourself, but like, you know, you can't, like, that could be the difference between you like getting a job or not getting a job at like a job interview or something like that. If your interviewer is a white person, so like, you know, if you use some kind of slang that they don't like, then that could be the difference. So
definitely. And I feel like every black kid I feel like we can never be ourselves. We always have to change for other people, which is so sad. But for example, if I'm with my white friends, I'm not gonna say things that I would say if I was with my black friends, just because I feel like I'm making them uncomfortable or they just wouldn't get it type thing. So like, just that being said, I feel like it's so unfair. Like I should be my own self at all times, but I can't just because society says you can't. Like, you're gonna look a different way if you speak a different way. You're gonna look like you're a bad person just because you said y'all instead of you all.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I'm a code switching pro at this point in life. I think it's a real thing too with being mixed. I think that's a whole different thing. I personally always identify myself as black because I feel like that's how I'm perceived by others, just because of my hair and my features. But it's like, again, having white friends and having black friends. I know it's always the like, why are you talking like that? You sound uneducated. That's not proper English. But it is. It's African American vernacular English. It's its own type of like this language become its own type of thing. And a lot of white people don't understand that. And I know personally in my experience with my family, like talking to white family members about things happening in the news, obviously you start off code switching and then they say something kind of stupid and then you stop. And then it's like all of a sudden like, wow, you sound so radical. You sound so violent. Who are you? This is not the person that I know. And so I feel like code switching causes you to have two sides of a personality. And as you grow up, it's really confusing to know who you are exactly, because you have this one persona and the other, and they're both parts of you, but not fully parts of you. Yeah, you start doubting yourself and you don't know who you are. It's like a big identity crisis.
Right.
Teachers need to be more like upfront, like tell them like you don't have to code switch with me. You can be yourself. Like I feel like they should be completely honest and completely open to every student and every student's personality, so the student doesn't have to feel like they have to act a certain way towards the teacher or anybody.
Right.
Just comforting them, making sure that they're not scared to ask questions. They don't feel stupid in front of the whole class, just assuring them.
So this is interesting feedback from our students, from our Madison High School students, about code switching. And as you heard, they all participate in it in some way, shape, or form. And many of them feel the burden or the responsibility to have to disprove stereotypes that their instructors or teachers may already have about them without knowing them, without talking to them, without meeting their family. That is a lot to have to overcome, whether you're starting a new class or you're a new student at the high school, you're starting out as a freshman at any point. And I wonder even if that is tiring, to have to walk into a classroom and basically have to be running uphill because it's not a level playing field for all the students there. I'm not sure that all the students have the burden of having to disprove a stereotype so that they believe they can have the opportunity to succeed and achieve like some of the other students. That's something that some instructors have to take into consideration. And as the last student said, like, hey, I wish they would just, pull me aside and have a little talk to say, hey, be you. I'm not asking you to be anybody else. Be who you are. I'm going to hold you to the same standard that I hold everybody else to. And I really think in all of these interviews, that is what Black students are looking for. I'm just trying to be held to the same standard as the next person, as the next student. I shouldn't have to work uphill to get to a level playing field. I shouldn't be put up above on the higher playing field. You shouldn't shower me with praise because I know an answer. Just treat me like you treat everybody else. That's what you could do for me. So the ask doesn't seem extraordinary to me. It seems simple. But yet we see that there's been a lot of difficulty in those interactions and in some of these classrooms when it comes to that. And that's something we definitely need to remedy. We're going to take a quick break here. On the other side of the break, we are going to get to some of our community leaders, some of our mental health specialists, and we're going to ask them also, what role environment plays in code switching. I mean, man, that just seems exhausting. So we're going to get into that right after this. You all tuned into Pick Up the Mic podcast with your host, Corey Whitmore. This is episode 3, Learning Environment and Code Switching. So we have just heard from the students. Now we're going to jump right into some of the reactions from some of the community leaders. mental health therapists that we also talk to for this interview process, for this podcast, and kind of get their point of view on school learning environments and the issue of code switching.
It's almost like you're living in two worlds.
Right.
And so it goes back to what we just talked about, not feeling that you can be your true self, and feeling that, here I have to pretend to be this, or here I have to pretend to be that. But you need to know that you're good enough to be who you are. And if people can't accept you for who you are, then that's on them. That's not on you. And I get exactly, what that student is feeling. I mean, I am not a student anymore. I am over 50 years old, but, it is amazing with being an administrator among folks that don't look like me. Most of them do not. And so some of the things that you would feel more comfortable with administrators that look like you, you tend to have more camaraderie. You tend to have, let your hair down, so to speak. So I definitely understand it, but it is truly a shame that anyone and any young person feels that they have to do that in class, because the teacher is really supposed to see you for who you are and really help you move forward to be your best self, whatever that may look like.
Like I said, that constant fear of rejection and not actually being able to, at some point, have that confidence in yourself to achieve your goals and believe that you can do it with, the way you are and not have to be and sound differently.
Right. And school should be a place where you're building that self-confidence, not continuously questioning it.
Absolutely.
Let me use this analogy, and I use it all the time in my work now. You're on the ocean. You're riding one of those fancy yachts. You're in a region where it's really, really cold, and you look out into the water and you see that iceberg. And so you see that iceberg and you start making a decision that I need to navigate around that iceberg. And so you start navigating around what you see on the surface. The problem is the iceberg is so massive underneath. And in this situation, code switching, when you constantly changing who you are and trying to please someone based on what you assume is the right thing, and then being rejected, that's trauma. And that trauma affects you. And then what tends to happen is people within the schools will look at you and they will assume that there is an issue based on what they see, not understanding what's underneath that surface. And all of this stuff that has been going on, trying to satisfy someone else or be something that you're actually not. So yeah, that code switching is trauma. And that's the way I look at it.
Thank you to Anissa's Therapy, Fiola and Clifton. Thank you for that. And Mrs. LaShawn Whitmore-Sells, who started off the talk in this section of talking about code switching. I found something interesting on a blog online called Talkspace that was talking about kind of the origins of code switching and talking about code switching as a person of color. And this is something I wanted to share with you before we conclude this episode. The blog goes to say, and this blog was written by two African-American mental health experts that have kind of looked at this and analyzed this. And in here, they state that code switching plays a big role in communication in American society, and that the cost of this practice mostly affects people of color. Studies have shown that there's a lot of Black and Hispanic Americans feel the need to change the way they express themselves around people of other ethnicities, especially around white Americans. Not only is code switching a way of life for most of these people, it has also become a means of survival. They reference a TED Talk from Chandra Arthur, founder of the Friendship app. And she explains kind of the impact of code switching in this talk. And I'm going to see if I can find this and put this on our Facebook social media, which is facebook.com/pickupthemicpodcast. And quote, she says, "The cost of code switching is immense, as it causes minorities to spend time worrying about cultural compatibility, rather than dwelling on things that do matter. For people of color, this can often be frustrating, and it can have a negative effect on their mental health and well-being." So just a little something to think about. We are going to return with more Pick Up the Mic podcast right after this. Welcome back to Pick Up the Mic podcast. I'm your host, Corey Whitmore. We appreciate everybody that tuned in today. We unpacked a lot in this episode, things having to do with students' learning environment and code switching and kind of all the nuances that go along with those things. So I hope you learned some things. I hope you gave you some things to think about. Now, before we conclude our episode, as we do with every episode, we want to make sure that we shout out a teacher, counselor, coach, administrator, someone that has had a positive, profound impact on the students that we interviewed. So here goes another one of those student shout outs.
The teacher I would like to shout out is Miss McGee, because she taught me that as a Black woman, you face judgment from everyone, from women, from other women, from men especially, and you're criticized especially in the line of working in education. And she showed me that through all of that, being strong and being persistent, you're gonna get your point across, and you're gonna show people that you are more than your color.
Shout out Miss McGee. Thank you for everything that you're doing and everything that you have done. You are truly an inspiration, and we just want to show our appreciation. This concludes episode 3, where we talked about learning environment and code switching. Make sure to follow us online. Follow us at Instagram and Facebook at Pick Up the Mic Podcast. We try and share the infographics that we use. We try to share some links to some of the articles and things of that sort that we reference here during the podcast. So make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Pick Up the Mic Podcast. Next week, we'll continue to talk about the Black experience, but what it has been like to be a student in what is now the post-Trump era and the George Floyd era and Black Lives Matter. Has that influenced your learning environment in certain ways? Has it changed your learning environment in some ways? Has it made it easier or harder for you being in school during these times? So we'll dive into that next week. I just want to give a thank you again to our listeners, give a thank you again to our students that participated and our community leaders that participated as well. You are much appreciated. So until next week, everyone have a good one. We'll see you then.